Alright guys, welcome to week 11, memory. It is a big week, not because it's super hard, just because there's a ton of vocab, but we're going to get through it together, so let's get started. So let's talk about memory. Memory is an active system that receives information from the senses, organizes it, and alters it as it stores it away, and then has the ability to retrieve it from storage. Now, there's three major processes of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is when using maintenance rehearsal in your short-term memory, it uses it and converts sensory information into information that can be stored into your long-term memory. Storage is when it sits in your long-term memory and waits for you to call upon it in your working memory, and then retrieval is getting that information out. Now, if you ever are stuck thinking you can't come up with an answer or anything, there's typically an error in the storage, retrieval, or encoding. So there's a couple of different ways you can think about memory. One of the best ways that I think it makes sense to think about memory is like a computer. If you think about memory in three major ways, is that levels of processing, that the model of memory that assumes information is more deeply processed or processed according to its meaning rather than the sound of physical character will be remembered more efficiently. So by actually stopping and thinking about something. Now, parallel distributed processing is a model of memory in which memory processes are proposed to take place at the same time over a large network of neural connections, believing that things occur over a period of time, not just in one immediate instance. But my favorite personally is the information processing model, which believes that information is processed like a computer. When you type into a Microsoft document, it's encoded. When you hit the save button, it is put in your short-term. When you type into it, you're encoding. If you type into it without hitting the save button, it's put into your short-term memory. And if you hit the actual save button and save it to your documents, then it's in the long-term memory. If you do it correctly, you'll be able to retrieve it. If not, there's an encoding failure, all those different types of things. And that all falls under the information processing. Now, when you think about memory, you need to think of it of a three-stage process. Now, information is going to go into your sensory memory using encoding. Now, once it's in your sensory memory, all your senses are processed for a second or so. Nothing more is going to be retained. So, for instance, if there's a smell in your house and you don't give it a selective attention, it's going to disappear and you're never going to have that memory again. Once a sensation is kept or focused on with select attention, it is then moved into your short-term memory. Now, in your short-term memory, it is also called your working memory, which means you're consciously aware. In your sensory memory, it's unconscious. In your long-term memory, it's also unconscious. Short-term is the only time you're actually aware of your thoughts. Now, once you get into short-term memory, unrehearsed information is lost within 15 to 30 seconds. So if someone tells you something and you don't pay attention, you have no retention of it. However, by doing maintenance rehearsal, when you remember the information, go over it, think about it, it's going to keep it in there longer. Now, with the maintenance rehearsal, it's called consolidation, that's eventually going to move it into your long-term memory. Once it's in your long-term memory, it's going to be held there indefinitely. Although some information is difficult to retrieve, most of it is not. And if you are going to retrieve it successfully, it moves from your long-term memory into your short-term memory. Now, let's focus on the first aspect of memory, which is your sensory memory. Now, sensory memory is the first stage of memory, and it's when information enters the nervous system through sensory systems. So, eyes, ears, taste buds, all those different types of things affected. Now, iconic memory is visual sensory memory lasting only a fraction of a second. So, like when you hear something, you turn around and look. When you smell something, you turn around and look. You turn around and say, that smells good. Those types of things are all iconic memories. Now, the capacity is that everything can be seen at one time. However, the duration, the information enters the iconic memory and then is pushed out very quickly in order to focus on other things. Now, eidetic memory is the rare ability to access visual memory for 30 seconds or more, when you can take in all of the sights and sounds all the time. If you've ever seen the show The Mentalist, that's a great example. He takes in everything all at the same time. Now, when you think about memory tests, you could do this whole sample grid of letters and determine if the entire grid existed, is an iconic memory and stuff like that. Now, a echoic memory is the brief memory of something that a person just heard. It means you can retain it further. Now, the capacity is limited to what can be heard at any one moment and is smaller than the capacity of iconic memory. So we hear less than we see, which makes sense. I mean, we depend so heavily on our vision. The duration lasts longer. It's about 2 to 4 seconds, but we can only hear we can hear less. Now, once something moves from our short-term memory, it's with selective attention, it moves to our short-term memory. Now, our short-term memory, also abbreviated STM or working memory, is the memory system in which the information is held for a brief period of time while being used. It only gets to this position by selective attention, which is the ability to focus on one specific sensory information. Now, once you're in your short-term memory, you can use the digit span test. It's a memory test in which a series of numbers are read to subjects in the experiment to see how many can recall in order. The magical number is 7, plus or minus 2 items. Sometimes they say 5 plus or minus 2 items, either or. Now, one of the other tips that we use for short-term memory increasing is a thing called chunking. Now, it's when bits of information are combined to meaningful units or chunks that are more information can be held in short-term memory. That is your social security number, your phone number, all those different types of things are broken down into smaller sections in order to make it more memorable. Now, in short-term memory, we have this thing called maintenance rehearsal. Now, maintenance rehearsal is the practice of saying some information to be remembered over and over and over again in order to maintain in the short-term memory. A perfect example of this is your vocab. I know so well that you are not studying your vocab for long-term memory, which is a shame, but let's be honest. Sometimes you just don't have that time. By doing things quickly and studying for it a couple minutes for the test and doing whatever you can to cram it in, you're just saying the words over and over and over and over in your head. If I did a big delay on giving you your sheet, having you take everything away, and holding off until you're allowed to start writing, a lot of you would not do nearly as well on your vocab sheet, which most of you would tell. Okay? Now, your duration of your short-term memory is only about 12 to 15 seconds without rehearsal or saying it over and over and over again. Now, your short-term memory is susceptible to interference, which means if I start having a conversation with you in the gap between all of your notes are away and the vocab quiz, you're going to lose information really quick. Okay? There you go. Now, a digit span test, memorize the different tests, see if you can get them in order, stuff like that. Now, long-term memory. With maintenance rehearsal, things go into your long-term memory. Now, long-term memory is a system of memory into which all information is placed and is kept for more or less permanently, depending on how well you put it in there. Now, elaborative rehearsal is a method of transferring information from short-term memory to long-term memory by making that information meaningful in some way, making it something that you really find catchy, you really get positive support for, you had a great experience doing it. Like, for instance, I remembered a lot of childhood songs. You've probably heard me sing a bunch of times around class. It's in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. What a courageous thing to do, because someone was already there. I know the whole damn song, and the reason is because I had to memorize it in a bunch of different classes and a bunch of different times, and my mom was in elementary school with me, so my mom used to have to learn the songs too. So because of all that exposure to these songs, do I know all of the Christopher Columbus song and the Dreidel song and Hanukkah song? All of those things play a major role. Now, when we talk about types of long-term memory, these are the hardest part, by the way, these memories. So please make sure you're definitely listening up. So the first type of long-term memory is a procedural or non-declarative. Non-declarative means are not consciously aware. Now, procedural memories are types of long-term memory, including memory for skills, procedures, habits, and conditioned responses. So for me, procedural or non-declarative memory would be when someone asks me for something, I say yes, ma'am, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir, all of those different types of things. It's a non-declarative. I don't even think about it, and it's procedural. Anytime I ask for something, I always say please and thank you. I just do it without thinking. Now, declarative memories are a type of long-term memories containing information that is conscious and known. So, memory of facts, knowing that your brain has 4 lobes. You learn that. You have gone out of your way to know that, all of those types of things. Now, your procedural or non-declarative long-term memories are things that skills you know how to do. This includes emotional association, habits, and simple conditioned reflexes. One of the big things that come out of this is anterograde amnesia, or loss of memory from a injury or trauma, where you are unable to form new long-term memories. If you've ever seen 50 First Dates, Drew Barrymore's character can't make new memories. She lives on the same birthday forever, however long ago. Now, procedural memories are often called implicit memories because it's not easily brought into conscious awareness. A lot of these things, like I don't even notice when I say yes, sir, no, sir, all those different types of things. Now, declarative are things that you're consciously aware of. Now, one of these things are semantic memories. They're types of declarative memories containing general knowledge, such as knowledge of language, information learned from formal education. So anything semantic is something you directly learned. Episodic memory are experiences that you went to or personal memories about you, for you, by you. So what your mom got you for your 12th birthday, going to see Taylor Swift, all of those things, and having a great time with your girlfriends. That is an episodic memory. Now, semantic and episodic memories are formed with explicit memories, or memories that are consciously known. You have to think about them, like, oh my God, do you remember when we went to Taylor Swift? Oh my God, it was so great. All those types of things. Now, when you deal with memories, it's nice to think of them as declarative and implicit, and underneath declarative, also known as explicit, you have episodic and semantic. Under long-term memories, you have implicit memories, and those are your procedural, done without thinking. Now, when we think about organization of memory, you need to think of long-term memory as related to meanings and concepts. This is all done with your semantic model, network model, when everything is brought together and is tied to each other, and it makes it easier for information to be brought together. Like, for instance, all of your information about school is all kind of grouped together. All of your information about your friends is grouped together. So when you think about your friends, it's easier to recall other things when you're with your friends. When you're at school and you're in class, it's harder. It's easier to remember other school things that you need to do. Okay, so an example of a semantic network would be your organization of animals. Okay, we have all the animals have skin, can move, but then we have birds, and then we have fish, and then under bird we have canaries, ostriches. Under fish we have shark and salmon. It's the breakdown of information into little groups, which makes it easier to process and more effective to process. Now, some of the things that we do to help our memory remember things is retrieval cues. It's a stimulus for remembering. We try to do things to help ourselves remember. So, like, for instance, oh my God, I know her name. Oh my God, she's friends with Sue. I've seen her. She usually works on Tuesdays. And you just think through a list, and that's kind of helps you remember your information. Now, when you are trying to remember, encoding specificity is the tendency for memory of information to be improved if related to other information. So when I learn someone's name, I really try to tie other things to it. Okay, so they are married to this person and she does this. Okay, and that helps me remember. Now, when you do that, it's called state-dependent memories, or memories formed during a particular physiological or psychological state, which will make it easier to recall. Now, when we recall, it is a type of memory retrieval in which information must be pulled from the memory with very few external cues. What that means is recall is cold flat. Okay, you just have to be able to retrieve. Like names is a recall. You have to be able to just pull it out. You can't say Susie and get away with it when their name is Sam. There's really no kind of getting there. It's either yes or no. When you are trying to recall and you can't, it's called a retrieval failure. It's when recall has failed. You just can't get the information. You're like, oh my God, I know her name. Oh my God, I know. You can't. And I'm like, I know it. That's called tip of tongue. And it's when information is not fully implemented. Now, when we talk about recall, some of the things that we can do to kind of help ourselves is serial position effect. Now, serial position effect tells us the tendency of information at the beginning of something and at the end of something are more likely to remember than anything in the middle, which makes sense. If your mom gives you a huge grocery list and you're sitting there, you'll remember the first couple items and you'll remember the last couple items, but you're not going to remember everything in the middle. If you only remember the things at the beginning of the list, it's called primacy effect, which means you only are processing the top information or the very beginning when you were really listening. But if you only remember the stuff at the very end of the list, it's recency effect, which is at the very end of the list. More people are going to remember the things at the beginning of the list than they are at the end of the list. And here shows you, proves that serial position is pretty effective. Now, when you're out and about in your real life, you probably can't recall things, but you do see things. You're like, oh my God, okay, that looks so familiar. That's called recognition, and it's the ability to match a piece of information to a stimulus or stored images. Now, sometimes we trick ourselves into things called false positives, and these false positives are error in recognition, in which people think they recognize a stimulus that's not actually in memory. When you think you see someone you know, and it's not them, but you really think it is. Like, oh my God, I totally just saw, Susie, and she was talking to this. No, Susie's not there. But you really think it's them. Or you're like, oh my God, I know you from somewhere. Where do I know you? And you have zero connections. You cannot figure it out. Okay, that's a false positive. We see a lot of false positives with eyewitness testimony. Despite the fact that we use them in our judicial system, does not actually mean they're that effective, which is pretty intense to think we depend on them. Elizabeth Loftus studies this, and we see that eyewitness testimony is not always reliable. Now, one of the major memories that are reliable are automatic encoding. There are some things that people just pick up information and they don't know why they remember it. There's a bunch of stupid things that I remember that I really shouldn't remember, but I do for some reason. That's called automatic encoding. There's some information you guys just pick up faster than other people. My husband, for instance, loves jokes. He loves stand-up comedians, so he has a ton of automatic encoding for jokes. Now, one of the most intense types of memories that we have is called flashbulb memories. And there are a type of memories that automatically occur, so you're not like sitting there saying, oh my God, I should really remember this. It just kind of happens. What it is when you have a really intense experience and you remember what you were wearing, where you were, what you said, what you saw. You remember all different components of it. A lot of people have flashbulb memories for car accidents they experienced. For September 11th is a very famous example. Any type of tragic situation people have experienced, they typically say. Now, when we deal with long-term memories, we have to remember it's like making up a story and then reading one in a printed book. We live it and then we try to recall it. Now, when we put things in memories, there's a lot of issues. Constructive processing is referring to the retrieval of memories in which those memories have been altered. Now, just because we think we're really good at remembering things doesn't mean we are. Even our own personal experiences, we do manipulate them, and that's called constructive processing. At the end of the day, what we want is to look back on things and see it just a little bit better than it probably was. So when we think back on things and we change the way it actually happened in order to make it easier on us, it's called hindsight bias, which is the tendency to falsely believe through revision of older memories to include newer information that could have been correctly predicted. So if you had a friend who really did you wrong and you're like, oh my God, I hate them so much. I knew it. I knew like a year and a half ago she was bad news when this happened. Like I just knew, but I just wasn't sure. No, you had no idea that person was going to screw you over. Okay, but hindsight bias, we want to believe things that we want to believe. Now, when we talk about memory retrieval or trying to pull information out that you studied for a test but you couldn't get the information out, that's called a retrieval problem. Now, misinformation effect is a huge part of that. It's the tendency of misleading information presented after an event to alter the memories of the event itself. So, for instance, your best friend cheats on you with your boyfriend, you're going to think back and say, "Oh my God, I knew she was a little, hoochie. She did this, she did this. I knew she was going to sleep with my boyfriend or be with my boyfriend or whatever." Okay? When you get new information and it affects old memories, instead of thinking back, "Okay, well, we're not good friends now. That's awful." Instead of thinking, well, we had a really great couple years, it's sad it's ended like that, we change our memories to be like, "Oh my God, I never really liked her anyway." And that's a really sad thing we do. Now, when we deal with our memory retrieval, there's a thing called false memory syndrome, and it's the creation of inaccurate or false memories through the suggestion of others. When we meet someone who doesn't like someone else, we kind of like, "Oh my God, I totally get that." Like, I knew they were kind of shady, even though there's never been an experience of this. Okay, that's called false memory syndrome. Now, when we deal with false memory syndrome, there's evidence that suggests false memories cannot be created for just any kind of memory. Memories that must be plausible or less concrete. Mostly in group experiences, you can come up with them and stuff like that. But a one-on-one conversation, it's pretty hard. Now, when we deal with memory, it's hard. You can't talk about memory without talking about forgetting. Now, the curve of forgetting is one of the big experiments of memory. It's the only actually experiment, really. It's a graph showing the distinct pattern of which forgetting is very fast in the first hour after learning a list and tapers off gradually. Now, the forgetting curve is done by Abangus. And now, Abangus is a gentleman who's going to memorize nonsense syllables. Abangus kind of makes a lot of sense. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to memorize a bunch of nonsense syllables and see how quickly he remembers. Now, these nonsense syllables, he's going to immediately recalls, after he memorizes it, he can recall them all perfectly. Then, about 20 minutes later, he can only recall some information. And you're going to see that it's a huge drop off. However, it will eventually taper out, and some of it will be maintained, which is pretty impressive. So the Abangus teaches us that our forgetting is immediate and significant. However, over the long term, some information will be retained. Now, when we deal with memories, we are dealing with distributed practice, which will produce better. What that means is because we know information that is just memorized right away will fall off very quickly, it's better to learn things sooner than later. Okay, so the faster you start studying for your vocab quiz and the earlier on and not last minute, the better it will be. Now, when we talk about forgetting, you have to know that it is an encoding failure. Now, encoding failures are failures to process information into memory. Means you didn't learn it well enough to do it. If you're getting a 4 or a 5 on your vocab, that's an encoding failure. You just didn't try. Okay, like you didn't really study your words. Okay, now an encoding failure would be which of these pennies are the correct kind. Now, you've never probably stared at a penny and said, "Oh my God, this is what a penny looks like." All of these kind of look like the basic, and you're trying to figure out which one it is. While looking at them, because you've never sat there and really studied a penny, you probably have no idea. Are you thinking? Are you thinking? Come to class, I'll tell you which one. Excuse me. Now, forgetting, there is a memory trace theory. What that is that it's a physical change in the brain that occurs when a memory is formed. Sometimes there's decay or a loss of a memory due to the passage of time, which means that the brain is just not retaining it and it's just kind of rotting away in your brain and eventually cannot be recalled. Or disuse, another name for decay. Assuming the memories are not used, will clearly decay and disappear. So if you're not using, you're losing, which kind of makes sense. Now, when you deal with forgetting, you have to deal with interference theories. Now, proactive interference is a memory retrieval that occurs when older information prevents or interferes with the retrieval of newer information. An example of this would be if you're very, very religious and you grew up in a very, very Christian home, the idea of the creationism or God created the earth in 7 days and all these things will stop you from really understanding and grasping the concepts of Darwinism and the foundation of the evolution of from monkeys to humans and all that stuff. Because of your very, 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 very religious backgrounds with your creationism ideas, it won't allow you to pick up the new information of evolution and similar characteristics and stuff like that. Now, retroactive interference is when newer information prevents or interferes with the retrieval of older information. What that means is that when you are when old information cannot be retrieved anymore. Like, for instance, an example of this would be when people ask me what's my name, I say Samantha Bennett, and they're like, well, have you always been Samantha Bennett? And I'm like, no, I was Samantha Reeves. And it takes a second for me to come up with Reeves because I'm so used to saying Bennett. That would be retroactive. My new information is corrupting my old information. Okay. Now, reasons for forgetting, encoding failure, decay, proactive interference, and retroactive interference are a huge component. Please make sure that you get those because there's a bunch of questions on them. Now, when we talk about the formation of long-term memory, we have to think of the engrams, or a physical change that takes place in the brain when a memory is formed. There's literally a spark of creation when memories are made, which are pretty cool. Now, consolidation is the change that takes place in the structure and functioning of neurons when an engram is formed. So neurons are starting to mold together in order to create this new memory. Now, all of this happens in the hippocampus, which is responsible for regulating and controlling the long-term memories. Now, one of the coolest things, or kind of scary things, about memory is amnesia. Now, retrograde amnesia is the loss of memory from the point of injury or trauma backwards, or loss of memory from the past. So if I, for instance, got into a car accident today and I had retrograde amnesia, I would not remember my wedding day. I would not know my husband. I would not remember my college graduation, my high school graduation, anything that happened previous to it. Now, andrograde amnesia is a loss of memory from the moment of trauma forward. So I'm unable to make new memories. This would be 50 First Dates, if you've ever seen that movie. Okay? It's the inability to form new long-term memories. Okay? So, now, autobiographical memory is the memory of events factually to one's personal life. Typically, we have infantile amnesia. We don't really remember anything before age 3 unless it was really, really traumatic. If it wasn't that traumatic, then we're okay. If it was incredibly traumatic, some people still remember. Typically, we forget all that stuff, which isn't a bad thing. What else is going on? You're sleeping and you're eating. Okay? Now, Alzheimer's disease is going to affect your memory. The primary memory difficulty in Alzheimer's is andrograde amnesia, which means you cannot remember new information. Although retrograde amnesia can also occur as the disease progresses, it's not that common. There are various drugs in use, however, we have not found a cure. Anyway, guys, it is a tough week. There's a lot of vocab. However, you all can do this. I know you'll do great. Keep working hard, and I'll see you in class. Have a great week.